Hello, this is Julia with Livewire Libraries, and as part of the Made Digital project, today I'm going to show you how to take a microbit and turn it into a step counter that you can use to log your steps, either walking or running. And it'll also show you how to use your step counter, your microbit, as a step counter to calculate the distance that you've walked or run. And we've got our new microphone today, so I hope the sound quality is clear on this recording. To do the step counter project, what you'll need is a laptop or you'll need a computer. You'll need a microbit. You'll need a connector to hook up the microbit to your computer or laptop, so it's a USB connector. And also you'll need a battery pack for your microbit. And the battery pack is necessary so that you can go walking or running with your battery pack and it'll count the steps and the distance you've traveled. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is go to the Google search bar, and we're going to go to Microsoft Make Code for Microbit, which should load up the website. The website is makecode.microbit.org if you want to navigate there manually, but it's easier just to do a Google search for microbit make code. And then the next thing you want to do is create a new project. So when you get onto the microbit website at makecode.microbit.org, you'll see that there's a new project button on the left-hand side. It's colored purple. You just want to click the plus button there to set up a new project, and it'll pop up a create a project, give your project a name area. And I'm just going to type in step counter and left click the create button. And what that'll do is it'll create a new project on the microbit website. And so it's created a new project for me. Well, I'm just going to get rid of this on start, left click, delete block to get rid of on start, but I'm going to use forever. So I'm going to keep that block. And then I'm going to get an input block called on button A pressed. And I'm going to grab another input block called, I'm going to use the same block on button A pressed, but I'm going to switch it to on button B pressed. And the reason that I'm grabbing on button A pressed and on button B pressed is I want my step counter to only show me my LED light display of steps and distance when I ask it to. And that's to save my battery life. Next thing I'm going to do is go into variables, and I'm going to make a variable. And I'm going to call the new variable name, I'm going to call it steps. So this will be my steps that'll be counted. That's my variable to hold my steps. And then I'm going to select set steps to 0. I'm going to slide that into my on button B pressed. And the reason that I'm going to do that is basically I'm saying that on my microbit, that B button on the right hand side, would I press that B button, I want it to reset my step counter. So I'm basically saying when I hit the B button, microbit, I want you to forget all steps previously counted. Just set my steps back to 0 now. And I'm going to click on show number and drag that block into the on button A pressed. And then I'm going to bring my variable in there. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying when the A button is pressed, so when I press the left-hand side A button on the front of my microbit, I want you to show me the number of steps I've walked. So this is, again, this is to save the battery life. If it always showed an LED display on the front of the microbit, it drained the battery really quickly. Right, so the next question is, well, how do you get the microbit to figure out how many steps you've done? A lot of people go into input and use on shake to basically change the number of steps, incrementing the steps by 1. So every time the microbit shakes, it changes the number of steps by 1. But I'm not quite sure that this is sensitive enough to do what I want to do, because I might just be shaking, I might not be walking, and it might be counting steps that I haven't actually done. So I want to use a more sensitive method to set up my step counter on my microbit, which I'll show you now. So I'm going into the input area and I'm grabbing something called acceleration MG. We're going to use the acceleration value, milli-G force. But if you're interested in delving a bit deeper into acceleration and how it works on the microbits accelerometer, you might want to navigate to makecode.microbit.org website. And on that page, there's a reference section for inputs, and it goes into a bit more depth about acceleration. And there's a video that you can watch that explains how the accelerometer works on the microbit and how it calculates the acceleration value. But for now, we're just going to be using the acceleration block in our calculations to figure out how many steps we've walked. So I'm going to go into my logic blocks, and I'm going to pull an if true then block out. And so basically what I want to do in my if then block is I want to take my variable steps, and I want to change the steps by 1 if the statement is correct. So what I need to do is go back into logic. I'm going to grab a comparison block. So I'm going to take my acceleration number and I'm going to compare it to another number. Oh, and there's X, Y, and Z values for the acceleration. I'm going to pick strength. And strength basically compares it to all values, my X, Y, and Z axes. We'll go over that a little bit in a couple minutes. And I'm going to set my acceleration to greater than 1500. So if the acceleration strength is greater than 1500, then change my steps by 1. So each time the accelerometer registers a strength in either the X, Y, or Z axes that's greater than 1500, it's going to register and say, hey, you've done a step, and it's going to add a step onto my step count. So basically at this point, our step counter is now counting steps, and it's going to show us the number of steps we've completed when we hit the A button, and it will reset the number of steps when we press the B button. But I want to do a little bit more. I want to also show the distance that I've walked or run, as well as the steps. So I'm going to add another variable onto this to show distance. So I'm going to go into variables, and I'm going to make a variable. And the new variable name, I'm going to call it distance, and left click the OK button. So I've set up a new variable called distance, and I'm going to drag in set distance to 0, and I'm going to put that when the B button is pressed so that I reset my number of steps as well as my distance whenever I press the B button. And then I'm going to go back into variables, and I'm going to go ahead and set distance to, I'm going to drag that block into my forever if then loop. And then I'm going to go into the math area and do a calculation. So I'm going to set the distance to a calculation, and the calculation is basically the number of steps multiplied by my stride. Now my stride I've calculated as 0.6 meters. So your average stride length or your average step length is measured from heel to heel. So what you want to do is you want to measure the distance from your heel to heel as if you were walking, and that will give you your average step length. And so when you multiply that by the number of steps you've taken, it should give you a pretty good measurement of how much distance you've walked or run. And then I want to go back up into my basics area, and I want to add show number, and I want to show my new distance that I've created. So now when I press the A button, it will not only show my number of steps, but it will also show me my distance. Okay, so you've probably remembered that on the left-hand side, we have a bit of a emulator that we can use to test out to make sure that our code works. So now what I'm going to do is, I can't really test my steps or distance, but I can test to make sure at least the initial values on A and B pressed work. So I'm just going to hit play, and then I'm going to hit B to reset, and then A to test to see what the LED lights will show on my microbit display. and I'm not quite happy with it. I kind of want it to tell me what I'm seeing. So I want it to tell me steps. So I've gone back into basic show string, and I want it to show me steps, the word steps after the number of steps. And I want it to tell me distance after it shows me the distance number. So I've gone in and modified my code on A button pressed to show strings. So that's a bit clearer when it's showing me the number of steps. So it says 0 steps, and then it'll show me 0 distance. And I don't quite like the spacing on that, so I'm going to go back in and fix the spacing. But this is the kind of thing that you can do in the simulator. You can do testing and decide whether you like the way it says things, or if you like what it's showing you, if you want to modify it before you actually import the code to your microbit, you can change it. And steps is fine, but I'm not too happy with distance. I think I'm going to change that to meters because my 0.6 stride calculation is in metric. So I'm going to change the string from distance to meters because I think I'd like it to show that instead. Now, getting a little bit back into the accelerometer, there's different ways that you could wear the microbit on your body when you're walking. And this is an example of someone who's put it onto their shoe. And you can see from the next slide that it shows you where the X, Y, and Z axes are. So if you were carrying it on your shoe and you were moving forward, you would be moving forward on the X axes. So you might want to change your accelerate from strength, which uses your X, Y, and Z axes to calculate your motion. You might want to change it to the X axis because the way you're wearing the microbit on your shoe makes the X-axis strength a bit more important than the Y or the Z. But it all depends how you're going to wear the microbit when you're actually walking. If you use the Y-axis, you might want to move to that. Or you might be happy with strength, which, as I said, is using your X, Y, and Z axes to calculate your movement. Just a quick note about comparing the acceleration to being greater than 1,500. You might need to change that number to make your step counter more accurate for you. The 1,500 number is just a comparison number. It's just a threshold. So modify it for you, what we call calibrate the threshold, to change that number so that when you test it out, it's accurately increasing the number of steps based on your actual walking. Okay, now that I'm happy that I've tested my code and I like the way it displays on the screen, I'm going to go ahead and download it. So I'm going to hit the left click that download button in the bottom left-hand corner. And this is download complete, and it says, okay, now we're ready to connect your microbit with a USB cable to the laptop or computer and move the hex file onto the microbit. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to download it, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it onto my microbit. So here I am taking the downloads, the hex file, and I'm dragging and dropping it onto my microbit, which is already connected via the USB port to my laptop. Here you can see that it's copying the file onto my microbit, and it's done. It's finished copying the file onto the microbit, so that's done. So now I can unplug my microbit and go ahead and attach it to my battery pack, because remember, we'll need the battery pack for power, and I can now test it in real life. So here I've hit press the B button, so it set everything back to 0 steps and 0 meters. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to test. I'm just going to pretend that I'm walking a little bit. Can't see my feet, but you can see the motion of my arms up and down as if I were striding forward. And then I'm just going to check. I'm not going to hit the B button again, because remember that reinitializes it to 0. I'm just going to hit the A button, and it's going to tell me how many steps I've completed, and then it'll tell me the approximate distance that I've walked. So thank you for watching this week's microbit demonstration, and I hope you've learned a few new things about microbits and how useful they can be, especially if you're trying to keep healthy and fit, and hope to see you again next week.